What happens when the woman an Alpha King publicly humiliates turns out to be the most dangerous force in the kingdom? Tonight, we're diving into the story of Elara Thorn, a healer's daughter who was rejected, broken, and cast aside like garbage. But when she returned, she didn't come back begging, she came back unstoppable. Stick with me until the end to see how the girl they destroyed became the one thing they all feared. And hey, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love hearing from you all. Now, let's get into this. The smell hit Elara before she even entered the Great Hall. Wine, roasted meat, perfume thick enough to choke on, and underneath it all, the sharp metallic tang of ambition. She stood outside the massive oak doors, her palms sweating, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. The guard beside her, a young man with kind eyes and a scar on his chin, gave her a sympathetic look. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. Elara wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that whatever was about to happen in that hall wouldn't destroy her. But the knot in her stomach told a different story. 3 weeks ago, the bond had snapped into place. She'd been gathering herbs in the eastern garden, her hands stained green from crushing mint leaves, when it happened. A jolt of electricity straight to her chest, so powerful she dropped her basket. The world had tilted, and suddenly she could feel him, his presence, his emotions, the weight of his existence pressing against hers like a second heartbeat. Riker Valen, the Alpha King, her mate. For 3 days, she'd waited for him to acknowledge it, to send word, to do something. But there'd been nothing, just silence and the constant pull of the bond, tugging at her ribs, whispering that she belonged to someone who didn't want her. Until tonight. Tonight, a royal guard had appeared at the healer's quarters with a summons. "The Alpha King requests your presence in the Great Hall, immediately." Her mother had gone pale. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Elara had said, but even she didn't believe it. Now she was here, standing outside those doors, wearing the only decent dress she owned, a pale blue thing her mother had made 3 years ago that was too tight in the shoulders and too loose everywhere else. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore no jewelry except for a small silver pin shaped like a crescent moon. She looked exactly like what she was, a nobody. The doors swung open. The great hall stretched before her like a nightmare. Hundreds of candles blazed from iron chandeliers, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. Long tables lined both sides of the room, packed with nobles in silk and velvet, their faces flushed with drink and laughter. At the far end, elevated on a dais, sat the throne. And on that throne sat Riker Valen. The bond pulled hard, and Elara stumbled. She caught herself, heat flooding her cheeks as a few people turned to look. Their expressions ranged from curious to contemptuous, and she forced herself to keep walking. Every step felt like walking through deep water. Riker watched her approach. Even from a distance, she could see his eyes, pale gray, cold as winter steel. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the world. His hair was black, cut short, and a scar bisected his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetually stern expression. He wore black and silver, the colors of the royal house, and a crown of twisted iron sat on his head like it had grown there. Beside him, draped across a smaller throne, like a cat in the sun, sat Serafina Blackwater, the chosen Luna. Serafina was everything Elara wasn't. Tall, elegant, with copper hair that fell in perfect waves down her back, and a body that looked like it had been sculpted by someone with very specific ideas about perfection. Her dress was deep crimson, cut low enough to make a statement, and rubies glittered at her throat and wrists. She smiled when she saw Elara. It was not a kind smile. Elara reached the base of the dais and stopped. The bond was screaming now, pulling her forward, begging her to climb those steps and touch him, claim him, make him acknowledge what they both knew. She stayed where she was. "Elara Thorn!" Riker's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The hall fell silent. "Step forward." She obeyed, climbing the 3 stone steps with legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Now she was close enough to see the details, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed once against the armrest, the muscle ticking in his cheek. He was annoyed. By her. By this. By the bond that had dared to choose for him. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. Elara's mouth was dry as sand. "No, Your Majesty." "No?" He leaned forward slightly. You haven't felt anything unusual in the past few weeks? Nothing compelling? Heat crept up her neck. Yes. Yes, what? Yes, I've felt it. The bond. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some sounded shocked, others sounded gleeful, like this was the best entertainment they'd had in months. And what exactly did you feel? Riker pressed. Elara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. You know what I felt. Humor me. She wanted to refuse, wanted to turn around and walk out and pretend this wasn't happening, but the weight of hundreds of eyes held her in place. I felt the mate bond, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Between you and me. The murmurs grew louder. Serafina made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close. Louder, Riker said, so everyone can hear. Elara's jaw clenched. She lifted her chin and spoke clearly. I felt the mate bond between you and me, Your Majesty. Silence crashed down like a hammer. Then Riker stood. The movement was fluid, controlled, and terrifying. He descended the steps until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell cedar and smoke and something wild underneath. The bond sang. You're a healer's daughter, he said. Yes. You can't shift. No. No rank, no bloodline, no power to speak of. Each word was a blade. Elara felt them cut deep, but she didn't look away. No, she agreed. And yet fate decided you should be my mate. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Interesting. I didn't ask for this. Neither did I. He turned, addressing the hall. Fate is a curious thing, unpredictable, sometimes wise. Sometimes, he glanced back at her. Deeply flawed. Laughter scattered through the crowd. Elara's chest felt tight. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. The bond was supposed to be sacred, permanent, unbreakable. But looking at Riker now, at the cold calculation in his eyes, she realized he didn't care about sacred. He cared about control. I've already chosen my Luna, Riker continued, gesturing to Serafina. A woman of impeccable breeding, strength, intelligence, someone worthy of standing beside a king. Serafina inclined her head graciously. But fate, in its infinite wisdom, decided to bind me to... Riker looked at Elara again. This. The word hung in the air like poison. Elara's nails bit into her palms. I have a name. Do you? Riker stepped closer, and the bond pulled so hard she swayed. Because from where I stand, you're nobody. A mistake. A broken link in a chain that should never have formed. The bond doesn't lie. No. But it can be wrong. That's not how it works. I decide how it works. His voice dropped, deadly quiet. I am the Alpha King, and I will not be shackled to weakness. Elara's breath caught. She knew what was coming, could feel it building in the air like a storm. No, she whispered. I, Riker Valen, Alpha King of the Iron Throne, don't reject you, Elara Thorn, as my mate. The bond didn't just break, it shattered. Pain exploded through Elara's chest, white hot, excruciating, like someone had reached inside her ribcage and torn out her heart with their bare hands. She heard herself scream, a raw, broken sound that echoed through the hall, and her knees gave out. She hit the stone floor hard. Around her, the court watched. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked away. But most just stared, their expressions ranging from pity to satisfaction. Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The pain was everywhere, consuming everything, and underneath it was something worse. Emptiness. A void where the bond had been, hollow and aching and wrong. She pressed her hand to her chest, gasping, and felt wetness on her cheeks. Tears. She was crying in front of everyone, in front of him. Riker looked down at her with nothing in his eyes. No regret, no hesitation, just cold, clinical detachment. Get her out of here, he said. Hands grabbed her arms, guards, their grips firm but not cruel. They hauled her upright, and Elara's legs barely held her weight. Her vision swam. Everything hurt. Wait. Her voice cracked, pathetic and small. Please. Riker had already turned away. You're embarrassing yourself, Serafina said, her tone almost gentle, almost kind. It's better this way. Trust me. The guards dragged her backward. Elara's feet scraped against the floor, and she couldn't find the strength to resist. The faces around her blurred together, nobles in their fine clothes, servants trying not to stare, people who'd known her name this morning and would forget it by tomorrow. Then she was out of the hall, out of the castle, out into the courtyard where the night air hit her like a slap. The guards released her, and Elara collapsed onto the gravel. She stayed there, shaking, her arms wrapped around herself as if that could hold the pieces together. It couldn't. Nothing could. Behind her, music started up again. Laughter drifted through the open windows. The celebration continued because why wouldn't it? She was nobody, a mistake, a rejected thing that didn't matter. Elara stayed on the ground until the cold seeped into her bones, until the shaking stopped, until the pain dulled into something she could almost breathe around. Then, slowly, she stood. Her legs wobbled. Her chest felt like a crater, but she was upright. She looked back at the castle, at the lights blazing in the windows, the towers reaching toward the sky, the place that had never been hers and never would be. And she walked away, not toward the healer's quarters, not toward anything familiar, toward the forest. The forbidden wood earned its name honestly. The trees grew too close, their branches weaving overhead into a canopy so thick that, even at midday, the forest floor stayed dim. The air smelled like rot and moss and something older, wilder, dangerous. The ground was uneven, roots snaking across the path like tripwires, and every few steps Elara had to catch herself before she fell. She walked anyway. She had no plan, no destination, just the desperate need to put distance between herself and the castle, between herself and the memory of Riker's cold eyes and colder words. Weakness. Nobody. Mistake. The words looped in her head like a curse she couldn't break. Her dress caught on a thorn bush and she yanked it free without slowing. The fabric tore. She didn't care. What did it matter? What did any of it matter? She'd spent her whole life trying to be useful, valuable. Her mother was the head healer, respected, skilled, someone who mattered. Elara had studied every herb, every remedy, every technique, hoping that if she worked hard enough, proved herself enough, she'd earn her own place. And for what? To be dragged in front of hundreds of people and told she was worthless? To have the one thing fate gave her, the bond, the mate, the promise of belonging, ripped away like it meant nothing? Elara's foot caught on a root, and this time she didn't catch herself. She went down hard, her hands slamming into the dirt, pain jolting up her wrists. She stayed there, on her hands and knees, breathing hard. And then she heard it. A sound. Faint, wet, labored. Breathing. Elara froze. Her heart, which had been dragging along at half speed, suddenly kicked into overdrive. She listened, trying to pinpoint the direction. There. To her left. Maybe 20 feet away. She should run. Whatever was making that sound, injured, desperate, dying, was none of her business. She had nothing to offer. No strength, no power, no... The thought cut off as instinct took over. Healer's instinct, the part of her that couldn't ignore suffering, even now, even when she could barely hold herself together. Elara pushed to her feet and moved toward the sound. She found the wolf behind a fallen tree, half hidden in shadow. It was massive. Even lying down, it was easily the size of a pony. Its fur was silver gray, matted with blood and dirt. One of its back legs was bent at an angle that made Elara's stomach turn, and a deep gash ran along its side, dark and glistening. But that wasn't what made her stop breathing. It was the eyes. Golden, intelligent, royal. This wasn't a wild wolf. This was nobility, alpha bloodline, someone important, and curled against its belly, whimpering softly, were 3 tiny pups. Newborns. Their eyes weren't even open yet. They nuzzled blindly at their mother, searching for warmth, for milk, for safety. The wolf's chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. It was dying. Elara's mind raced. She should leave, run back to the castle, find someone who could actually help. The royal family had healers, real ones, trained ones, ones who knew how to handle this. But those healers weren't here, and this wolf would be dead in minutes. Elara knelt slowly, her hands shaking. The wolf's eyes tracked her movement, wary but too weak to do anything about it. "I don't know if I can help you," Elara whispered. I don't have... She stopped, took a breath. I'm going to try. She reached out, her hands hovering over the gash. Blood pulsed from the wound in steady, weakening beats. Too much blood. Too much damage. Her mother's training kicked in automatically. Apply pressure. Stop the bleeding. Keep the patient calm. But this wasn't a scraped knee or a fever. This was trauma. Massive, fatal trauma. Elara pressed her hands against the wound anyway. The blood was warm, sticky. It soaked through her sleeves, into her skin, and she tried to remember what her mother had taught her about deep cuts, about keeping pressure, about heat. It started in her fingertips, not painful, not burning, just warmth spreading up her hands, into her wrists, her arms. It felt alive, humming under her skin like a second pulse. Elara's breath hitched. The warmth turned to light, golden light, pouring from her palms, spilling over the wolf's wound like liquid sunlight. It moved on its own, seeking out the torn flesh, the shattered bone, the places where life was leaking away. And it fixed them. Elara watched, frozen, as the gash began to close. The skin knit together, smooth and whole. The broken legs straightened with a sound like branches snapping back into place. The wolf's breathing deepened, steadied, grew strong. The light faded. Silence. Elara stared at her hands. They were still covered in blood, dark and drying now, but underneath, her skin was unmarked. No cuts, no burns, nothing. What the hell was that? The wolf stirred. It lifted its head, golden eyes locking onto Elara's. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then the wolf stood, smoothly, easily, like it hadn't been on death's door 30 seconds ago. It was even more massive upright. Its shoulder came up to Elara's chest, and when it moved, muscles rippled under silver fur. The three pups tumbled forward, yipping and stumbling on unsteady legs. The wolf nuzzled them gently, checking each one before turning back to Elara. And then it did something impossible. It bowed. Not a casual dip of the head, a full, formal bow, front legs bent, head lowered, submission in every line of its body. To her. Elara's heart hammered. What are you? The wolf stepped closer. Elara's instinct screamed at her to back away, but she held still as the massive creature lowered its head and pressed its forehead against her chest, right over her heart, right where the bond used to be. Warmth flooded through her, not the burning light from before, something gentler, steadier. Yours, it seemed to say. We are yours. Elara's hands came up automatically, burying themselves in the wolf's thick fur. It was soft, warm, real. I don't understand, she whispered. The wolf pulled back and looked at her with those golden eyes, ancient, knowing, patient. Then it turned and nudged the pups toward Elara. The smallest one, a runt with a white patch on its chest, tumbled over its own feet and landed at her knees. It looked up at her, yipped once, and wagged its tiny tail. Elara's throat tightened. These pups, this wolf, they were royalty. They belonged in the castle with guards and caretakers and people who knew what they were doing, not with a rejected nobody sitting in the dirt. But the wolf didn't move, just kept watching her, waiting. And the pups, they were so small, so vulnerable. If she left them here, they'd die. If she took them back to the castle, they'd be taken away, and she'd be punished for even touching them. There was no good choice, so Elara made a bad one. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. You can come with me. The wolf's tail swished once. Approval. Elara gathered the pups carefully, cradling them against her chest. They were warm and wriggly and made tiny squeaking sounds that shouldn't have been as comforting as they were. The wolf followed as Elara stood and started walking deeper into the forest, away from the castle, away from everything she'd ever known, into the dark. She walked until her legs gave out. It took hours, maybe longer. Time felt strange in the forbidden wood, like the trees swallowed it up along with the light. When Elara finally stopped, it was because she physically couldn't go any further. Her dress was in tatters. Her feet were bleeding. The pups had fallen asleep against her chest, and her arms ached from carrying them. She found a shallow cave, more of an overhang really, carved into the side of a rocky hillside, and collapsed inside. The wolf settled beside her, a warm, solid presence. Elara set the pups down gently. They stirred but didn't wake, curling together in a pile of fur and tiny paws. "What am I doing?" Elara asked the darkness. The wolf huffed softly. "Right. Helpful." Elara leaned back against the stone, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Her chest still ached where the bond had been. Her hands still tingled from the light. Everything hurt. But the pups were breathing, the wolf was alive, and for the first time since she'd walked into the great hall, Elara felt something other than pain. Purpose. She didn't know what the light was, didn't know why it had chosen her, or what it meant, or if she'd ever be able to do it again, but she'd saved a life tonight. 4 lives, if you counted the pups. That had to mean something, didn't it? Elara closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them again, dawn was breaking. The wolf was gone. Panic jolted through Elara, and she scrambled upright, searching the cave. The pups were still there, still sleeping, but the mother. A sound outside made her freeze. Elara crept to the mouth of the cave and peered out. The wolf was standing a few feet away, her massive head lowered as she drank from a small stream. When she saw Elara, she lifted her head and wagged her tail once. Relief flooded through Elara so fast it made her dizzy. "You scared me," she said. The wolf padded back to the cave, water dripping from her muzzle. She settled beside the pups, and they immediately woke up, yipping and crawling over each other to nurse. Elara watched them, something tight in her chest loosening just a little. "I should give you a name," she said. "Can't just keep calling you Wolf." The wolf's ears twitched. Elara studied her, the silver-gray fur, the golden eyes, the strength that radiated from her even at rest. "Ash," she said finally, "because of your fur. And because you rose from, well, you know." The wolf's tail thumped against the ground. Approval. "Ash it is." One of the pups, the runt, detached from nursing and wobbled toward Elara. It collapsed halfway there, too tired to make the journey, and made a pitiful squeaking sound. Elara scooped it up. The pup fit easily in her palm, warm and wriggly. It looked up at her with eyes that hadn't quite opened yet and yawned, showing tiny pink gums. "Your trouble," Elara murmured. "I can already tell." The pup licked her thumb. Alara's throat tightened. She'd never had pets, never had anything that depended on her like this. And these weren't just animals, they were royal wolves. Important, valuable, dangerous. If anyone found out she had them, no, she couldn't think about that. Not now. Right now, she needed to focus on surviving, on keeping them alive, on figuring out what the hell she was going to do next. But as she sat there, the runt pup curled in her hand and Ash watching over her other babies, Elara felt something she hadn't expected. Not hope, exactly, but not despair either. Something in between. Something that felt like the possibility of a future, even if she couldn't see its shape yet. She'd been rejected, broken, cast aside. But she was still here, and so were they. That had to be enough. For now, it had to be enough. The first week was the hardest. Elara had no supplies, no food, no blankets, nothing except the torn dress on her back and 3 newborn pups who needed constant care. She learned to forage by trial and error, which berries were safe, which roots wouldn't make her vomit, where to find clean water. She made mistakes, ate things that left her doubled over with cramps, drank from a stream that gave her fever for 2 days. But she survived. Ash hunted. The wolf would disappear for hours and return with rabbits, sometimes a young deer. She'd tear the meat into pieces small enough for Elara to cook over the pitiful fires she managed to build with shaking hands and damp wood. The pups grew, not slowly, the way normal wolf pups should. They grew fast, impossibly fast. By the 3rd day, their eyes had opened, revealing gold irises that tracked Elara's every movement. By the 5th day, they were stumbling around the cave on wobbly legs. By the 7th, they were play-fighting with each other, their growls high-pitched and almost comical. Elara named them during a rainstorm that turned the forest into a cold, miserable swamp. The runt, the one with the white patch on his chest, she called Storm. Because he was small but fierce, always the first to charge into trouble. The largest pup, a female with fur so dark it was almost black, became Shadow. She moved quietly, watched everything, rarely made noise. The middle pup, another female with reddish tints in her gray fur, was Ember. She had a temper and wasn't afraid to use her teeth. "You're all going to be the death of me," Elara muttered as Storm tried to eat her bootlace for the third time that morning. He wagged his tail, completely unrepentant. Ash watched from the cave entrance, her expression almost amused. The wolf had recovered completely from her injuries. No limp, no scar, nothing to suggest she'd been dying just days ago. If anything, she seemed stronger. Her coat gleamed, her eyes were bright and alert, and she never left Elara's side. It should have felt strange having a royal wolf defer to her. But somehow it didn't. Ash treated Elara like pack, like family, and the pups followed their mother's lead. To them, Elara wasn't a rejected nobody. She was alpha. The thought made her laugh the first time it crossed her mind. Her, an alpha? She couldn't even shift. Couldn't access the most basic ability every wolf in the kingdom had. But the pups didn't care. When she called, they came. When she said no, they stopped. When she slept, they curled around her like she was the most important thing in their world. Maybe she was. On the 8th day, Elara tried to summon the light again. She waited until the pups were asleep, curled in a pile against Ash's belly. Then she sat cross-legged near the cave entrance and held out her hands. "Come on," she whispered. "You did it before. You can do it again." Nothing happened. She closed her eyes, trying to remember what it had felt like. The warmth, the humming under her skin, the way the light had poured out of her like it had a mind of its own. Still nothing. Frustration built in her chest. "Please, I need to understand what you are." A flicker. Faint. Gone almost as soon as it appeared, but it had been there. Elara's eyes snapped open, her heart racing. She tried again, focusing on that feeling. The warmth, the pull, the sense of something other waiting just beneath her skin. The light came. Not a flood this time, just a soft glow in her palms, steady and golden. Elara stared at it, barely breathing. It didn't hurt, didn't burn. It just existed, warm and alive, and hers. She held it for maybe 10 seconds before it flickered and died. But it had been there. She could do it. Whatever this power was, wherever it came from, it was hers to control. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. Because power like this didn't go unnoticed. And if anyone found out what she could do, if the wrong people learned she could heal the dying and make light from nothing, they'd either use her or kill her. Probably both. Elara pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The forest was quiet, except for the distant hoot of an owl and the soft breathing of the pups. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. And the only creatures in the world who cared if she lived or died were 3 wolf pups and their mother. It should have broken her. Somehow, it didn't. On the 10th day, the soldiers came. Elara was gathering firewood when she heard them, voices cutting through the forest, rough and loud. She dropped the sticks and ran back to the cave, her pulse hammering. Ash was already on her feet, hackles raised. The pups had gone quiet, their ears flat against their heads. "Hide," Elara whispered, gesturing to the back of the cave. "All of you, don't make a sound." Ash herded the pups deeper into the shadows. Storm whined softly, but Shadow nipped his ear, and he fell silent. Elara crept to the cave entrance, peering through the brush she'd carefully arranged to hide it. 6 men, all wearing the red cloaks of the royal guard. They moved through the forest with military precision, spread out in a line, checking every hollow, every shadow. "Nothing here," one of them called. "Keep looking." The voice belonged to a tall man with a scar bisecting his jaw. He had the bearing of someone who'd been giving orders for a long time and expected them to be followed. "The king wants those pups found. We don't go back without them." Elara's blood turned to ice. They were looking for the pups. Of course they were. Royal wolves didn't just disappear. Someone must have noticed Ash was missing, noticed the pups were gone, and now they were tearing the forest apart to find them. "We've been out here for over a week," another soldier muttered. "They're probably dead by now." "Then we bring back bodies," the scarred man said flatly. "Move." The men spread out, poking through undergrowth with spears, overturning logs. One of them was maybe 30 feet from the cave, close enough that Elara could see the mud on his boots. Inside the cave, Storm growled. It was barely audible, just a low rumble in his chest. But in the quiet forest, it might as well have been a bell. The soldier stopped. You hear something? Elara's heart stopped. Hear what? Thought I heard. The soldier took a step toward the cave. Ash moved so fast, Elara almost missed it. The wolf darted out of the shadows and bit Storm's scruff, hard enough to make the pup yelp and fall silent. The soldier froze. There. You hear that? Probably just a fox, another man said. Forest is full of them. Didn't sound like a fox. You want to go check every animal sound in this place? We'll be here till winter. The soldier hesitated, staring in the direction of the cave. Elara held her breath. Then a shout came from deeper in the forest. Found tracks over here. The soldiers turned and ran toward the sound. Elara waited, counting her heartbeats, until the voices faded completely. Then she sagged against the cave wall, shaking. That was too close. Way too close. Ash emerged from the shadows, the pups trailing behind her. Storm looked chastened, his tail tucked between his legs. It's okay, Elara whispered, even though it wasn't. You didn't know. But they couldn't stay here, not anymore. The soldiers would keep searching, keep widening their net. Eventually they'd find the cave. And then what? Elara couldn't fight 6-armed men. Couldn't protect the pups if it came to a real confrontation. She needed to move, find somewhere safer, somewhere farther from the castle, deeper in the forbidden wood, where even the king's soldiers wouldn't go. But first, she needed supplies, which meant going into town. Grey Hollow sat at the forest's edge like a barnacle clinging to a rock, small, gray, and barely worth noticing. Elara had been there once before, years ago, with her mother on a supply run. She approached it now in the last light of day, her hood pulled low over her face. She'd used mud to cover the worst tears in her dress and braided her hair tightly to keep it out of the way. She didn't look good, but she didn't look like royalty either. Just another traveler, dirty, tired, forgettable. The general store was exactly where she remembered, a squat building with a crooked sign and windows that needed washing. A bell jangled when Elara pushed open the door. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was maybe 50, with kind eyes and flour dust on her apron. Help you, dear? I need supplies, Elara said, keeping her voice low. Dried meat, bread, cloth for bandages if you have it. The woman's gaze sharpened, taking in Elara's appearance. You hurt? No, just being careful. The woman moved to gather the items, wrapping them in brown paper. You from around here? Passing through. Dangerous time to be traveling alone. The woman set the bundle on the counter. Especially for a young girl. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can. The woman's eyes flicked to Elara's hands. You're from the capital, aren't you? I can tell by the calluses, healer's hands. Elara's stomach dropped. I don't know what you mean. Relax, I'm not going to turn you in. The woman leaned against the counter, lowering her voice. But if you're smart, you'll keep moving. Word from the capital is tense. Tense how? The Alpha King's in a mood, tore through half his council last week looking for someone to blame for something, and there's talk of missing royals. Elara's mouth went dry. Missing? 3 pups, newborns, royal bloodline. The woman shook her head. Some say they were stolen, others say they ran off. Either way, the king's not happy about it. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate's one word for it. The woman pushed the bundle toward Elara. Soldiers have been searching the forest for days. Found a girl 2 days ago camping near the border. She didn't know anything, but Commander Thorn didn't care. What happened to her? The woman's expression darkened. What do you think? Elara felt sick. Take the supplies, the woman said quietly, and get as far from here as you can. Whatever you're running from, it's not worth dying over. Elara wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't running, wasn't hiding, wasn't afraid, but it would all be lies. How much do I owe you? She asked instead. Nothing. Consider it charity. The woman's eyes softened. We don't get many healers out here. If you ever decide to stop running, come back, we could use someone like you. Elara took the bundle, her throat tight. Thank you. Be safe, girl. Elara left before the woman could see her cry. She made it back to the cave as full dark fell. Ash was waiting at the entrance, her ears pricked forward, alert. "We have a problem," Elara said. She told Ash everything, the soldiers, the dead girl, the fact that the entire kingdom was looking for the pups. Ash listened without moving, her golden eyes fixed on Elara's face. "They're going to keep searching," Elara said, "and eventually they're going to find us. We need to move deeper into the forest, somewhere no one will think to look." Ash's tail swished once. Agreement. "But first," Elara hesitated, "I need to get stronger. This power, whatever it is, I need to control it. Because if soldiers find us, I can't just hide. I need to be able to protect you. Protect them." She gestured to the pups, who were tumbling over each other near the back of the cave. Ash studied her for a long moment. Then the wolf turned and padded deeper into the cave, disappearing into the shadows. Elara frowned. "Where are you?" Ash returned carrying something in her mouth. She dropped it at Elara's feet. A bone, long and thick, probably from a deer. Elara picked it up, confused. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Ash backed up several paces, then lowered herself into a crouch. Ready. Understanding dawned. "You want me to fight you?" Ash's tail wagged once. "I can't. You're twice my size. You'll—" Ash lunged. Elara barely had time to throw up her hands. The light exploded outward instinctively, forming a barrier just as Ash hit it. The wolf bounced back, landing on her feet, and immediately lunged again. "Stop!" Elara gasped, but Ash didn't stop. The wolf circled, feinted left, then struck from the right. Elara tried to follow, tried to anticipate, but Ash was faster. The wolf's teeth closed on Elara's sleeve and yanked, sending her stumbling. The light flickered and died. Ash released her and backed up, waiting. "This is insane," Elara panted. Ash lunged again. This time, Elara was ready. She summoned the light and shaped it, not into a barrier, but into something sharper, a blade of pure energy that extended from her hand. Ash dodged, but barely. They went back and forth like that for what felt like hours. Ash attacking, Elara defending, both of them moving faster and faster until Elara's lungs burned and sweat dripped down her spine. And then something clicked. The light stopped feeling like something separate, stopped feeling like a tool she had to consciously summon. It became an extension of her, natural as breathing. Elara thrust her hand forward, and the light lanced out like a spear. It stopped an inch from Ash's chest, humming with power. Both of them froze. Elara stared at what she'd created, solid, lethal, completely under her control. Ash huffed, almost impressed, and sat down. Elara let the light fade, her hands shaking. "I did it." Ash's tail thumped against the ground. "I actually did it." For the first time since the rejection, since the pain and humiliation and fear, Elara felt something like hope. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't weak. She had power, real power. The kind that could protect the people, the wolves she cared about. The kind that could make people think twice before hurting her. Storm bounded over, yipping excitedly, and knocked into Elara's legs. She laughed and scooped him up, even though he was getting too big to hold comfortably. "You're proud of me?" she asked. Storm licked her face. "Yeah, me too." She set him down and looked at Ash. "We'll train every night. I'll get stronger, fast enough that when they find us—" "When who finds you?" The voice came from the cave entrance. Elara spun, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stood silhouetted against the moonlight, tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. He stepped forward into the firelight, and Elara's world tilted. Riker. The Alpha King stared at her, his pale eyes taking in everything, the pups, Ash, the remnants of light still glowing faintly in Elara's palms. His expression was unreadable. "Well," he said quietly, "this is interesting." Elara's first instinct was to run. Her second was to summon every ounce of light she had and fight. She did neither because Ash moved first. The wolf placed herself between Elara and Riker, lips pulled back to reveal teeth that could tear through armor. A growl rumbled from her chest, low, threatening, the kind of sound that made prey animals freeze in terror. Riker stopped, his hand moving to the sword at his hip. "Don't," Elara said sharply. Both of them looked at her. "Ash, stand down," Elara commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The wolf didn't move, her golden eyes locked on Riker. "Ash, please." After a long, tense moment, Ash stepped back. But she didn't relax, didn't lower her guard. The pups had gone completely silent behind Elara, their instincts telling them to stay hidden. Riker's gaze moved from Ash to Elara, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or confusion. "She listens to you," he said. "Yes, that's not possible. Ash is royal bloodline. She doesn't take orders from—" He stopped himself. "From nobodies?" Elara finished. "From rejected mates? From girls who can't even shift?" Riker's jaw tightened. "I wasn't going to say that. But you were thinking it." He didn't deny it. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the small fire and Storm's barely audible breathing. Elara's hands were still glowing faintly, the light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She forced herself not to look away from Riker's cold gray eyes. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I've been tracking Ash for 3 days. She disappeared the same night you did." His gaze flicked to the pups, though they were still hidden in shadow. "Along with 3 royal heirs. They're not heirs. They're children. They're both. And they belong to the crown." "They belong to themselves," Elara shot back. "Or did you forget that living things aren't property? Everything in this kingdom is property when it serves the crown." Riker took a step forward, and Ash snarled again. He stopped. "I'm not here to hurt them." "Then why are you here?" "To bring them home. To bring you home." Elara laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "I don't have a home. You made sure of that." "The rejection wasn't just a rejection." Elara's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "You humiliated me, in front of everyone. You called me weak, worthless, a mistake. You tore the bond apart like it meant nothing. It had to be done." "Why? Because I wasn't convenient? Because I didn't fit into your perfect plans? Because the kingdom needs strength," Riker's voice echoed off the cave walls. "Because an Alpha King can't afford to be bound to someone who can't even shift. Someone with no bloodline, no power, no—" He stopped, his eyes dropping to her hands, to the light still glowing there. "No power," Elara repeated softly. "Is that what you were going to say?" Riker stared at the light like he was seeing a ghost. "What is that?" "I don't know." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Elara let the light fade, clenching her fists. "It showed up the night I saved Ash, the night I healed her when she should have died." "Healed her?" Riker's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "You're saying you can heal?" "I'm saying I did something. I don't know what it was or how it works, but Ash was dying and now she's not." Riker looked at Ash, really looked at her, and Elara saw the moment understanding dawned. The wolf was too healthy, too strong. There should have been scars, at least, evidence of whatever trauma had nearly killed her. There was nothing. "Show me," Riker said. "No. That wasn't a request." "I don't care." Elara crossed her arms. "You don't get to order me around anymore. You rejected me, remember? I'm not your mate. I'm not your subject. I'm nothing to you. You're harboring royal property, but they're not property." Storm chose that moment to toddle out from behind Elara's legs. The pup was almost comically large now, the size of a full-grown hound, and he moved with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of a child who hadn't quite figured out his own limbs. He looked up at Riker with bright gold eyes and wagged his tail. Riker went very still. "That's—" his voice caught. "That's not possible. He should still be nursing, should barely be able to walk." "I know. How big are the others?" Elara hesitated, then whistled softly. Shadow and Ember emerged from the darkness, flanking their brother. All 3 pups were massive, their coats thick and glossy, their eyes alert and intelligent. Riker stared at them like they were mythical creatures. "What did you do?" "I told you. I don't know. They're growing too fast, developing too fast. This isn't natural. Neither is light coming out of my hands, but here we are." Elara knelt and ran her fingers through Storm's fur. The pup leaned into her touch, making a happy rumbling sound. "Whatever happened when I healed Ash, it changed them too." "Changed them how?" "They're stronger, faster, smarter than they should be at this age." Elara looked up at Riker. "And they're loyal to me, not to you, not to the throne. To me." She said it as a challenge, waiting for him to argue. Instead, Riker slowly lowered himself into a crouch, bringing his eyes level with the pups. Storm cocked his head, curious, and took a tentative step forward. "Don't," Elara started. Storm's hackles went up, and he growled. It wasn't the pitiful sound of a baby wolf. It was deep and threatening, the kind of growl that said he knew how to use those teeth. Riker didn't move. "He doesn't trust me." "Why would he? He doesn't know you." "I'm his alpha." "No," Elara said quietly. "I am." The words hung in the air between them. Riker's gaze lifted to meet hers, and for the first time since he'd appeared, she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Uncertainty. "That's impossible," he said, but there was no conviction in it. "Is it? You said yourself they're developing too fast. Maybe they know things they shouldn't. Maybe they can sense things." Elara stood, and the pups immediately moved to her side. "Or maybe you're just not as important to them as you think you are." Riker's expression hardened. He rose to his full height, and the cave suddenly felt smaller. "I need those pups back at the castle." "No. It's not a negotiation." "You're right. It's not." Elara lifted her chin. "Because I'm not giving them to you. You're not giving me a choice." "Good. Because you didn't give me one either when you rejected me in front of the entire court." Riker's hand moved to his sword, and light exploded from Elara's palms before she could think. It formed a barrier between them, crackling and bright, and Riker jerked his hand away from the hilt. "Don't," Elara warned. "You'd fight me." "If I have to." They stared at each other across the barrier of light. Elara's heart was hammering, her breath coming fast. She didn't know if she could actually fight the Alpha King, didn't know if her power was strong enough to stop him if he really tried to take the pups. But she'd die trying. Riker must have seen it in her eyes because his hand fell away from his sword completely. "You've changed," he said. "You broke me. I rebuilt myself." "I never meant—" "I don't care what you meant." Elara let the barrier drop. "You did it anyway. And now I'm supposed to what? Thank you for coming to drag me back? Hand over the only creatures in the world who actually give a damn if I live or die? It's not safe out here. Safer than being in a castle with a king who thinks I'm worthless." "I don't—" Riker stopped, frustration clear on his face. "That's not what I think." "Then what do you think?" He didn't answer. A howl cut through the night, distant but getting closer. Then another, and another. Riker's head snapped toward the sound, and his expression went dark. "Thorn," he muttered. "Who?" "My commander. He's been—" Riker's jaw clenched. "He's been difficult since the pups went missing." More howls joined the first, a lot of them. "Those are his men?" Elara asked, her stomach dropping. "His wolves. He's tracking me." "Your own commander is tracking you?" "He thinks I'm too weak to retrieve the heirs myself, that I need to be replaced." Riker's voice was bitter. "If he finds you first—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Elara understood. "We need to move," she said, already gathering the few supplies she had. "Now." "There's no point. They'll track us. Then we fight." "There are too many." "Then what do you suggest?" Elara spun to face him. "Because I'm not handing them over to someone who's going to kill them just to make a point." Riker was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Elara never expected. "Come with me. Back to the castle. Under my protection." "Are you insane?" "It's the only way to keep them safe. If Thorn finds you out here, you can't protect them. But if you're at the castle, if I claim you publicly, you rejected me publicly. And I can unreject you." Elara stared at him. "That's not how it works." "I'll make it work." Riker stepped closer, and this time Ash didn't growl. "The bond is broken, but the claim doesn't have to be. I can take you as my Luna without the bond. It's been done before when mates die. The kingdom needs stability. The pups need protection. And you—" He stopped. "I what?" "You need to stop running." The howls were getting closer, much closer. Elara looked at the pups, at Storm, who was trying to look brave, but couldn't quite hide the fear in his eyes, at Shadow and Ember pressing against each other for comfort, at Ash, who was watching Elara with an expression that said the choice was hers. She thought about the soldiers in the forest, about the girl who died because Thorn thought she might know something, about the fact that she couldn't keep running forever, couldn't keep the pups hidden indefinitely, and she thought about walking back into the castle that had cast her out. into the hall where she'd been broken, with the man who'd broken her. "If I do this," Elara said slowly, "things change. I'm not a decoration. I'm not a symbol. I have a voice. I know. And the pups stay with me, always. They don't get locked in kennels or separated or treated like weapons." "Agreed. And you?" Elara's voice cracked slightly. "You don't get to humiliate me again. Ever. If you make me look weak in front of anyone, this is over." Riker's eyes softened, just a fraction. "I won't. Promise me." "I promise." The howls erupted from the tree line, dozens of wolves streaming into the clearing, their eyes reflecting the firelight like demons. At their head was a man on horseback, his armor dark, his face scarred. Commander Thorn. He saw Elara and Riker and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Well, well," Thorn called out, dismounting. "The Alpha King, alone in the woods with a traitor and stolen property. How convenient." Riker moved to stand beside Elara. "Stand down, Commander. That's an order." "I don't think so." Thorn drew his sword. "You've proven yourself unfit, Riker. Too weak to protect the heirs, too distracted by a broken bond to see the threats around you. The only threat here is you." "Is it?" Thorn's gaze swept over his men. "We'll let them decide." The wolves began to circle, cutting off any escape. There had to be 30 of them, maybe more, all battle-trained and loyal to Thorn. Elara's hands began to glow. Thorn noticed. His eyes narrowed. "What is she?" "None of your concern," Riker said. "Everything about the royal heirs is my concern, including whatever dark magic she's used to corrupt them." "I didn't corrupt anyone," Elara said. "No? Then why do they follow you instead of their king?" Thorn pointed his sword at the pups. "Why have they grown like monsters instead of normal wolves?" "They're not monsters, they're abominations, and so are you." Thorn's voice rose. "Seize her. Kill the wolves. We'll sort out the heirs later." The wolves moved as one. Elara didn't think. She just acted. Light exploded from her in a wave, bright enough to blind, hot enough to burn. It slammed into the advancing wolves and sent them tumbling backward, yelping and snarling. The clearing went silent. Everyone stared at Elara, at the light still crackling around her hands, at the golden glow emanating from her skin. "Back away," she said quietly. "All of you." "Witchcraft," Thorn breathed. "She's a witch." "I'm a healer," Elara corrected. "And if you come any closer, I'll show you exactly what that means." One of the wolves, braver or stupider than the rest, lunged at her. Elara's hand shot out, and light lanced through the air like a blade. It struck the wolf mid-leap and sent it crashing into a tree. The animal yelped once and went still. Not dead. Elara could see its chest rising and falling, but unconscious. She'd pulled the blow at the last second. "Anyone else?" she asked. No one moved. Thorn's face had gone red with rage. "You dare!" "I dare a lot of things now." Elara stepped forward, and the light around her intensified. "You want the pups? You'll have to go through me, and I promise you, Commander, you won't like what happens if you try." Behind her, the pups had arranged themselves in a protective formation. Storm in front, teeth bared. Shadow and Ember flanking him. Ash stood at Elara's side, her massive form radiating menace. And Riker. Riker drew his sword and moved to stand beside Elara. "You heard her," he said. "Stand down. Last warning." Thorn looked between them, his expression calculating. Then he smiled again. "You've chosen your side, then. The side of a traitor and a witch over your own kingdom." "I've chosen the side of my mate," Riker said. The words hit Elara like a physical blow. Thorn laughed. "Your mate? You rejected her. In front of everyone. The bond is broken." "The bond doesn't matter. She's mine. They're mine," Riker's voice carried across the clearing. "And if you or anyone else tries to take them, I'll kill you myself." For a moment, Thorn looked genuinely shocked. Then his expression hardened into something ugly. "So be it," he said. "When the council hears about this, when they learn you've sided with a witch and stolen heirs—" "The council will hear whatever I tell them to hear," Riker interrupted. "Because I'm still king, and you're still just a commander who forgot his place." Thorn's hand tightened on his sword. "We'll see how long that lasts." He turned and mounted his horse. "Move out!" he barked at his men. The wolves retreated slowly, their eyes never leaving Elara and the pups. When they'd melted back into the forest, the silence felt deafening. Elara let the light fade, her legs suddenly shaking with exhaustion. That had taken more out of her than she'd expected. Riker caught her before she fell. "Steady," he said quietly. "I'm fine." "You're not, but you will be." He looked down at her, and something in his expression had changed. The coldness was gone, replaced by something Elara couldn't quite name. "That was stupid? Incredible." Elara blinked. "What?" "You faced down 30 wolves and a trained commander without hesitation. You protected them." He glanced at the pups. "Protected me." "Don't read too much into it. I was protecting them, and you were just in the way." Riker's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Right. We need to go," Elara said, pulling away from his grip. "Thorn won't stay gone. He'll regroup and come back with more men. Then we move fast." Riker looked at the cave, at their meager supplies. "Can they travel?" "The pups?" "Yes, they're stronger than they look. They're stronger than anyone I've ever seen." Riker shook his head. "What did you do to them?" "I saved them. Whatever came after, I didn't mean for it to happen. But it did. And now we have to deal with the consequences." Elara met his eyes. "We?" "We," Riker confirmed. "Like it or not, we're in this together now." Storm chose that moment to bound over and headbutt Riker's leg. The king stumbled, caught off guard, and the pup wagged his tail happily. "He's warming up to you," Elara said, surprised. "Or he's testing to see if I'll fall over." "Probably both." They gathered what little there was to gather and started moving. Riker led them on a different path than they'd come, one that wound deeper into the forest where the trees grew so thick that even moonlight couldn't penetrate. It should have been terrifying, but with Ash on one side, Riker on the other, and the pups trailing behind like a small army, Elara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Safe. It wouldn't last. She knew that. Thorn would come back. The council would demand answers. The entire kingdom would learn that their rejected mate had somehow become something more. But for now, in this moment, walking through the dark with creatures who'd chosen her, Elara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. And not just survive. Win. They reached the castle walls just before dawn. Elara had forgotten how massive they were. Gray stone rising 50 feet into the air, crowned with iron spikes and patrolled by guards whose shadows moved like clockwork. The eastern gate loomed ahead, its portcullis raised just enough to suggest someone had been expecting them. "This is a mistake," Elara said, stopping. Riker turned to look at her. He'd been silent for most of the journey, his face unreadable in the dim pre-dawn light. "You want to go back to the forest? Wait for Thorn to find you again?" "I want to not walk into a trap." "It's not a trap." "You can't know that. I sent word ahead. My personal guard, no one else. They'll meet us at the gate and escort us to the royal wing." Riker's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, exhaustion maybe, or stress. "No one will touch you or the pups. You have my word." "Your word." Elara laughed, the sound hollow. "Forgive me if that doesn't mean much anymore." Riker flinched, actually flinched. It was so brief that Elara almost missed it, but it was there. "Fair," he said quietly, "but it's all I have to offer right now." Storm whined, pressing against Elara's leg. The pup was tired. They all were. They'd been walking for hours, and even with their unnatural growth, the pups were still young, still vulnerable. Ash nudged Elara's hand with her nose. The wolf's golden eyes were steady, trusting. Elara took a breath and nodded. "Fine, but if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, I'm blaming you. I'd expect nothing less." They passed through the gate. The guards on duty did double takes when they saw Elara and the wolves, but they didn't move to stop them. One of them, a young man Elara vaguely recognized from the kitchens, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it and looked away. Word would spread fast. By breakfast, the entire castle would know that the rejected mate had returned with the missing royal heirs. By midday, the whole kingdom would be talking. Riker led them through a side entrance Elara had never seen before, a narrow stone corridor lit by torches that smelled like damp and old metal. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, and the pups stayed close, their ears swiveling at every sound. They climbed 2 flights of stairs, turned down a hallway lined with portraits of dead kings, and finally stopped at a heavy wooden door. Riker pushed it open. The room beyond was massive, easily 3 times the size of the healer's quarters where Elara had grown up. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall draped in dark blue fabric. A fireplace big enough to stand in took up another wall, already lit and crackling. Windows overlooked the eastern gardens, and thick rugs covered the stone floor. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "This is," Alara's voice caught, "this is the Luna's suite." "Yes. I can't stay here." "You can and you will." Riker gestured to a side door. "There's a bathing room through there, clean clothes in the wardrobe. Food will be brought up within the hour." "Riker, get some rest. We'll talk later." "We need to talk now." "Later," he repeated, already turning to leave. "I have to deal with the council before they hear about this from someone else." "What are you going to tell them?" Riker paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "The truth. That you saved the heirs. That you're under my protection. That anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me directly. They're going to lose their minds. Let them." He looked back at her, and for a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped. Elara saw exhaustion in his eyes, doubt, fear. "I'm tired of playing politics while people I care about suffer for it." "People you care about," Elara echoed. "You mean the pups?" Riker's expression shifted into something Elara couldn't read. "Get some rest," he said again, and then he was gone. The door closed with a heavy thud. Elara stood in the center of the Luna's suite, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of, with 3 wolf pups and their mother staring at her like she had answers. "I have no idea what I'm doing," she told them. Storm wagged his tail. Shadow yawned. Ember was already curled up on one of the rugs, fast asleep. Ash just watched Elara with those knowing golden eyes. "Right," Elara muttered. "Guess we're doing this?" She moved to the window and looked out at the gardens. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It would have been beautiful if Elara's stomach wasn't tied in knots. She was back in the castle, the place that had destroyed her, and somehow she had to find a way to survive it again. Elara didn't sleep. She tried. She lay down on the massive bed, which was so soft it felt like sleeping on a cloud. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Riker's face as he rejected her, heard the laughter of the court, felt the bond tearing apart inside her chest. After an hour of staring at the ceiling, she gave up. She bathed instead, scrubbing away weeks of dirt and blood and fear in water so hot it turned her skin pink. The tub was big enough to swim in, and there were soaps that smelled like lavender and honey. Elara used them all, washing her hair 3 times just because she could. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was softer than anything she'd ever owned, she found clean clothes laid out on the bed. Not servants' clothes, not even nobles' clothes, royal clothes. A dress in deep emerald green cut to fit perfectly, with silver embroidery along the hem and sleeves. Matching slippers. A cloak lined with fur. Elara stared at them like they might bite. "This is insane," she said to Ash, who was lounging by the fire with the pups piled on top of her. "I can't wear this." Ash's tail thumped once against the floor. "You can." "I look ridiculous in fancy things," Ash huffed. "Try it." Elara tried it. The dress fit like it had been made for her, which it probably had, knowing Riker's efficiency. It hugged her waist and fell in soft folds to the floor, and when Elara looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked regal, powerful, like someone who belonged in a place like this. It was a lie, of course. Elara didn't belong here, didn't belong anywhere except maybe a forest cave with wolves who didn't care that she was nobody. But the dress didn't know that. A knock at the door made her jump. "Lady Elara," a woman's voice muffled through the wood. "His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber." Elara's stomach dropped. "Now?" "Yes, my lady. I'm to escort you." Elara looked at Ash. The wolf stood, stretching, and the pups immediately scrambled to their feet. "You're coming?" Elara asked. Ash's expression clearly said, "Obviously." "All of you?" Storm barked once, tail wagging. "Okay," Elara breathed. "Okay, we can do this." She opened the door. The woman waiting outside was young, maybe a few years older than Elara. with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and the kind of neutral expression that came from years of service. Her eyes widened when she saw the wolves. "They're coming too?" "Yes." "That's highly irregular." "I don't care." The woman's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "As you wish, my lady." They walked through the castle corridors, and Elara felt every eye on them. Servants stopped mid-task to stare. Guards straightened at their posts. Nobles whispered behind jeweled hands. The wolves drew the most attention. Storm trotted proudly at Elara's side, his chest puffed out like he owned the place. Shadow moved like a ghost, silent and watchful. Ember kept growling at anyone who looked at them too long. And Ash moved like the queen she was, her massive form commanding respect without effort. Elara tried to match that energy, tried to walk like she belonged, like she had every right to be here. It was harder than it looked. The council chamber doors loomed ahead, massive oak things carved with wolves and crowns. The woman who'd escorted Elara stopped and curtsied. "They're waiting for you, my lady." Elara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. "Thank you." The doors swung open. The chamber was exactly as Elara remembered, a long stone room with a table down the center and chairs for 12 counselors. All of them were occupied. All of them turned to look when Elara entered. At the head of the table sat Riker, his crown catching the light from the windows. Standing beside him was a woman Elara recognized all too well, Seraphina Blackwater, the chosen Luna. She looked exactly as she had the night of the rejection, tall, beautiful, draped in crimson silk that probably cost more than Elara's childhood home, but something in her expression was different, sharper, more calculating. When she saw Elara, she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, but it wasn't cruel either. It was interested. "Gentlemen," Riker said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Lady Elara Thorn and the recovered royal heirs." The room erupted. "This is outrageous. She stole them! Dark magic. The bond was rejected. Enough!" Riker's voice didn't rise, but somehow it was louder than all of them. The counselors fell silent. "Lady Elara didn't steal the heirs," Riker continued. "She saved them. When Ash was dying in the Forbidden Wood with 3 newborn pups, Elara risked her own life to heal them. She kept them alive when everyone else had written them off as dead. Heal them?" One of the counselors, Lord Garrett, Elara remembered, leaned forward. "What does that mean, heal them?" "It means exactly what it sounds like." Riker's gaze swept the room. "Elara has a gift, a power we don't fully understand yet. But what we do know is that she used it to save royal wolves who would have otherwise been lost." "And you believe this?" another counselor demanded. "You believe she has some kind of magic?" "I've seen it with my own eyes." "Then show us," Lord Garrett said, turning to Elara. "If you have this power, demonstrate it, now!" Elara's throat went dry. Every eye in the room was on her, judging, waiting for her to fail. She looked at Riker. He gave a small nod. Permission. Or maybe encouragement. Elara held out her hand. The light came easier now than it had in the forest. It pooled in her palm, golden and warm, casting shadows across the council chamber's stone walls. The counselors stared. Some looked awed. Some looked afraid. Lord Garrett just looked skeptical. "Parlor tricks," he said. "Light is easy enough to fake." Elara closed her fist, and the light exploded outward in a wave that washed over the entire room. It didn't hurt, she made sure of that, but it was bright enough that several counselors cried out and shielded their eyes. When the light faded, Elara was standing exactly where she'd been, her hand still extended. "Not a trick," she said quietly. Silence. Then Seraphina started to clap. It was slow, deliberate, almost mocking, but when Elara looked at her, there was genuine approval in the woman's eyes. "Well done," Seraphina said. "That was quite the performance." "It wasn't a performance," Elara shot back. "It's what I am." "And what exactly are you?" Lord Garrett asked. "Because that didn't look like any healing magic I've ever seen." "I don't know what it is," Elara admitted, "but I know what it's done. It saved Ash. It changed the pups. And if you're smart, you'll stop questioning it and start thinking about what it means for this kingdom." "What it means?" Garrett's eyes narrowed. "It means we have a witch in the castle." "Enough." Riker stood, and the room fell silent again. Elara is not a witch. She's not a threat. She's my Luna. The room erupted again. You rejected her. The bond is broken. This is madness. The bond may be broken, Riker said, his voice cutting through the chaos. But the claim doesn't have to be. I'm invoking the right of reclamation. Dead silence. Elara had no idea what that meant, but from the looks on the counselors' faces, it was significant. The right of reclamation hasn't been used in over a century, Lord Garrett said slowly. Then it's about time we brought it back. Riker's gaze swept the room. Elara Thorn saved the royal heirs. She's proven herself capable, powerful, and loyal, and I'm claiming her as my Luna under ancient law. Anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me directly. No one moved. Good, Riker said. Then it's settled. The coronation will be in 3 days. Prepare accordingly. He turned and walked out, leaving Elara standing in a room full of shocked nobles. Serafina was the first to approach. She stopped in front of Elara, looking her up and down with those sharp eyes. Interesting, she said. What is? You. This whole situation. Serafina tilted her head. I thought you'd come crawling back, broken and desperate. Instead, you walk in here with royal wolves at your heels and light in your hands like you own the place. I don't own anything. Not yet. Serafina's smile widened. But you will, whether you want to or not. What's that supposed to mean? It means you just became the most important person in this kingdom, and you have no idea what you're doing. Serafina leaned closer, her voice dropping. Lucky for you, I do. Why would you help me? Because I'm practical. Riker chose you, really chose you, not just for politics. That makes you valuable. Serafina straightened. And I collect valuable things. Before Elara could respond, Serafina turned and walked away, her red dress trailing behind her like blood. Elara stood alone in the council chamber, surrounded by whispering nobles who wouldn't meet her eyes. Storm pressed against her leg, and Elara buried her hand in his fur. What just happened? She whispered. Storm wagged his tail. Ash huffed softly. You won. Won what? The first battle, Ash seemed to say. The rest come later. Matam. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Elara was fitted for a coronation gown, white and gold, so elaborate it took 3 women to help her into it. She was taught how to walk, how to stand, how to hold her head when wearing a crown. She met with advisors and nobles whose names she couldn't remember and who looked at her like she was either a miracle or a monster. She never saw Riker. He was busy, she was told, dealing with Thorn, managing the council, preparing for the coronation. Elara told herself she didn't care. She was lying. Serafina visited twice. The first time, she brought Elara a list of nobles to watch out for, people who'd supported Thorn, people who wanted the throne for themselves, people who'd smile to her face and plot behind her back. The second time, she brought wine. They sat in Elara's chambers, the Luna's chambers, Elara had to remind herself, and Serafina poured 2 glasses. You're nervous, Serafina observed. I'm terrified. Good. That means you're smart. Serafina sipped her wine. Riker's making a mistake, you know. Elara's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Not with you, with the coronation. He's rushing it, giving his enemies too much time to plan and not enough time to prepare defenses. Why would he do that? Because he's desperate. Serafina's eyes met Elara's. Thorn is gathering support, spreading rumors that Riker's weak, that he's being controlled by a witch. If Riker doesn't make a strong move soon, he'll lose the throne. So the coronation is a power play, a statement. Serafina leaned back. And you're the centerpiece. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does. Serafina's expression softened slightly. But you're here now, and you can either let them destroy you, or you can learn to destroy them first. I'm not a destroyer. You brought down 30 wolves with a wave of your hand. You faced Thorn without flinching. You walked into this castle like you owned it. Serafina's smile was sharp. You're more of a destroyer than you think. Todd. The coronation took place in the Great Hall, the same hall where Elara had been rejected. She walked down the center aisle wearing the white and gold gown, a crown of silver and moonstone waiting at the end. The pups walked beside her, Storm on her left, Shadow and Ember on her right. Ash followed behind, massive and regal. The hall was packed. Every noble in the kingdom had come, their faces a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Elara kept her eyes forward. Riker stood at the front in black and silver, his own crown gleaming. Beside him was the High Priestess, ancient and knowing, her eyes like smoke. When Elara reached the dais, the priestess began to speak. Elara Thorn, you have been chosen by fate, tested by fire, and proven worthy. Do you accept the responsibility of Luna to protect this kingdom and its people? To stand beside your alpha in strength and in weakness? Elara's throat was tight. She thought about the girl she'd been, small, scared, convinced she was worthless. That girl was gone. I do, she said. The priestess placed the crown on her head. It was lighter than Elara expected, but the weight of what it represented was crushing. The hall erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Riker stepped forward and took her hand, raising it high. You're Luna, he said. The applause grew louder, and for the first time since she'd walked into this hall, weeks ago, broken and humiliated, Elara felt something like power. Real power. The kind that couldn't be taken away. Storm barked, his tail wagging, and the crowd laughed. Elara smiled. She'd survived the rejection, survived the forest, survived coming back, and she was just getting started. The celebration lasted until dawn, but Elara left before midnight. She couldn't stomach another minute of false smiles and careful words from nobles who'd watched her get rejected in this very hall and done nothing. They congratulated her now, called her My Lady and Your Grace, but their eyes told a different story. They were waiting for her to fail, waiting for proof that she didn't belong. Let them wait. Elara slipped out through a side door, the pups trailing behind her. They were getting too big for the halls. Storm had knocked over a serving tray earlier, and Ember had nearly bitten a counselor who'd gotten too close. Shadow moved like a ghost, silent and watchful, her dark fur blending into corners. But no one dared complain. Not with the crown on Elara's head and Riker's claim protecting her. She made it back to her chambers and closed the door, leaning against it with a sigh of relief. The crown felt heavy. Not the physical weight, that was manageable. It was everything else. Every expectation, every eye watching her, every whisper wondering how long she'd last. Tired already? Elara's eyes snapped open. Seraphina sat by the fireplace, a glass of wine in her hand, looking completely at home in Elara's private space. She'd changed out of her formal gown into something simpler but no less elegant, deep purple, that made her copper hair look like flames. How did you get in here? I have my ways. Seraphina gestured to a second glass on the table. Join me. You look like you need it. Elara should have told her to leave, should have called the guards. But something about Seraphina's presence was oddly comforting. She understood this world in a way Elara didn't. And right now, Elara needed someone who understood. She sat down and took the wine. It was good, better than anything she'd tasted before, rich and smooth with a bite at the end that warmed her throat. You did well tonight, Seraphina said. Better than I expected, actually. I smiled and nodded and didn't set anyone on fire. That's not exactly impressive. It is when half the room wants you dead. Seraphina sipped her wine, studying Elara over the rim. Lord Garrett tried to corner me earlier. Wanted to know if the power you displayed in the council chamber was real or theater. What did you tell him? That if he had to ask, he was already too stupid to understand the answer. Seraphina's smile was sharp as broken glass. He didn't appreciate that. Despite everything, Elara laughed. It felt good, real, like maybe she could actually do this. You should be careful with him, Seraphina continued, her tone turning serious. Garrett's ambitious. He supported Thorn's bid for power because he thought he could control him. Now that Thorn's in chains awaiting trial, Garrett's looking for a new piece to play. He can look all he wants. I'm not interested in being anyone's piece. You don't have to be interested. He's interested in you. Or rather, interested in removing you. Seraphina leaned forward, firelight catching in her eyes. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? I'm Luna now. I have responsibilities, rules to follow, a role to play. Rules are for people who can't break them without consequences. Serafina's eyes glinted. You have power, Elara. Real power, not just the crown, the light, the wolves. The fact that you survived what would have destroyed most people. The fact that you walked back into the place that broke you and claimed it as yours. Use it. How? By not letting them define you. They want you to be the grateful little healer girl who got lucky. The charity case Riker took pity on. Don't give them that. Serafina stood, setting down her glass with a soft click. Be what you actually are. Something they've never seen before. Something they can't control or predict or dismiss. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Oh, and one more thing. Thorn escapes tomorrow. Elara's blood went cold. The wine glass nearly slipped from her fingers. What? His supporters are planning a prison break. Dawn, most likely, when the guards change shifts. They've bribed someone on the inside, haven't figured out who yet, but it doesn't matter. Serafina's expression was unreadable, carefully neutral. I thought you should know. How do you? Because I have people everywhere. Servants talk. Guards drink. Nobles scheme in rooms they think are private. Serafina opened the door. Unlike Riker, I don't wait for threats to materialize before I act on them. I see them coming. Why are you telling me this? Why not go straight to Riker? Because you need to prove yourself, not to me. I'm already convinced, but to yourself and to everyone watching. Serafina's smile returned, softer this time, almost fond. Do with that information what you will, but if I were you, I'd be ready. She left, the door closing behind her with a soft thud. Elara sat in silence for a long moment, her mind racing. Thorn was escaping, tomorrow, and if he got out, if he gathered his forces, regrouped with his supporters, the kingdom would tear itself apart in civil war. Everything Riker had built, everything they'd just established with the coronation, would crumble. She had to tell Riker. Elara stood, still wearing her coronation gown, and headed for the door. Storm lifted his head from where he'd been dozing by the fire. Stay, Elara said. Guard the others. Storm whined, but obeyed, settling back down beside Shadow and Ember. Elara moved through the castle corridors, her slippers silent on stone floors. Most of the celebration guests had finally dispersed, heading to their chambers or leaving the castle entirely. A few stragglers remained drunk and laughing too loudly. She found Riker in his study, still wearing his formal clothes minus the crown. He was hunched over maps and reports, his shoulders tight with tension. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Elara, I thought you'd gone to bed. Thorn's escaping tomorrow, she said without preamble. Riker went very still. What? Dawn, prison break. His supporters are staging it during the guard shift change. Someone on the inside has been bribed. Elara moved closer to the desk. We need to stop him. How do you know this? Riker's voice was sharp, controlled, his strategist's voice. Serafina told me. Riker's jaw tightened. He stood, already reaching for his sword belt hanging on a nearby chair. And you trust her? I trust that she wouldn't lie about something like this. What would be the point? What's in it for her? Elara watched him buckle the sword into place with practiced efficiency. We need to stop him. Now. Tonight. We will. Riker's mind was already working. She could see it in his eyes. I'll triple the guards at the prison. Move Thorn to a secure location where his supporters can't reach him. Post my personal guard at every entrance. That won't work. Riker looked at her sharply. Why not? Because if his supporters are organized enough to plan this, to bribe someone, to coordinate a dawn raid, they're organized enough to adapt. We move Thorn, they'll know. We triple the guards, they'll find another way. We're always going to be one step behind. Elara took a breath, steadying herself. We need to do something they won't expect. Like what? Let him escape. Riker stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Absolutely not. No. Out of the question. Hear me out. Elara moved around the desk, standing across from him, so he had to look at her directly. If Thorn escapes, he'll go straight to his supporters. He'll lead us right to them. We can track him, find out who's really backing him, where they're gathering, what their actual plans are. We can cut the whole conspiracy off at the root instead of just trimming branches. Or he disappears into the countryside and starts a rebellion we can't stop, gathers an army, attacks the castle with forces we didn't know he had. Riker shook his head. It's too risky. Not if I'm tracking him. You? The pups can track anything. You've seen how good their noses are. Ash, too. She's hunted her whole life, and Elara hesitated, then pushed forward. I can sense life. It's part of the power, the light. I can feel living things around me, their presence, their energy, especially if they're hurt or afraid or desperate. Thorn will be all of those things once he thinks he's free. Riker was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. It's too dangerous. If something goes wrong, then we adapt, like we always do. Like we did in the forest with your commander's wolves. Like we did with Garrett in the council. Elara stepped closer. This is our chance to end it. Really end it. To find everyone who's plotting against you and deal with them all at once. But only if we're smart about it. Only if we're willing to take the risk. And if it goes wrong, if Thorn gets away, if you get hurt, then you'll have learned something about your enemies, and I'll heal myself. I've done it before. Elara met his eyes. I'm not the girl you rejected anymore, Riker. I'm not fragile. I'm not going to break because things get dangerous. I've been living with dangerous for weeks. Riker studied her face, and Elara saw the moment he made his decision, the moment he chose to trust her. You stay behind me during the actual confrontation, he said. The wolves stay with you. And if anything goes wrong, you run. You get yourself and those pups to safety, and you don't look back, understood? Understood. I mean it, Elara. I'm not losing you again. I can't. His voice caught just slightly. I can't do that twice. The vulnerability in his words hit her harder than she expected. She reached out and took his hand. You won't have to. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. I'm powerful, remember? Terrifying even. You said so yourself. Elara managed a small smile. Now, let's go wake up the captain of the guard and tell him the plan. Chat. They staged it perfectly. The guards were briefed, only the ones Riker trusted absolutely, the ones who'd served with him for years. They created a blind spot in their patrol route, a gap that would be obvious to anyone looking for weaknesses. The prison door's lock was carefully damaged, made to look old and faulty. Thorn's cell was positioned where a rope could coincidentally reach from a window that was accidentally left unbarred. It was so obvious that Elara worried he'd smell the trap, but desperation made people stupid, and Thorn was desperate. Elara spent the hours before dawn preparing. She practiced summoning the light, holding it, shaping it into different forms. Blades, shields, ropes of pure energy. The power came easier now, almost natural, like breathing. The pups sensed something was happening. They stayed close, restless and alert. Storm kept pacing. Shadow's ears never stopped moving, tracking every sound. Ember growled at nothing, her instincts on fire. Ash was the calmest, but even she had a tension in her shoulders that said she was ready to fight. Just before dawn, Thorn made his move. Elara felt it the moment he left his cell, a spark of life moving fast, fueled by adrenaline and fear and triumph. She stood on the battlements with Ash and the pups, her eyes closed, tracking that spark as it moved through the castle, down to the lower levels, out through a drainage tunnel that the guards had forgotten to monitor. He's out, she said. Riker, mounted on a black warhorse beside her, nodded to his men. 20 of them, all armed, all loyal. Stay back. Let him think he's free. Give him enough rope to hang himself and everyone with him. They followed at a distance. Thorn moved through the forest like a man who knew every tree, every path, every hiding spot. He was heading somewhere specific, somewhere he thought was safe, somewhere his supporters were waiting. Elara tracked him easily, the light inside her responding to his life force like a compass pointing north. They stayed far enough back that he wouldn't hear them, wouldn't see them, wouldn't know he was leading them exactly where they wanted to go. After an hour of hard riding through increasingly dense forest, Thorn reached a clearing. Elara felt them before she saw them. Dozens of life forces clustered together. 20, at least. Maybe 30. All armed, all waiting. Thorn's army. Riker signaled his men to stop. They dismounted silently, leaving the horses tied to trees, and crept forward on foot. Elara moved with them, the pups flanking her, Ash a silent shadow at her side. They reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. Thorn stood in the center, gesturing wildly, talking to someone. Elara couldn't see who at first, too many bodies in the way, too many soldiers blocking her view. Then the crowd parted. Lord Garrett stepped forward. Elara's breath caught. Riker went absolutely still beside her. Garrett looked exactly as he had at the coronation. Expensive clothes, carefully groomed beard, the bearing of a man who thought he deserved to rule. He listened to Thorn with the expression of someone who'd heard it all before and wasn't particularly impressed. "You're sure they didn't follow you?" Garrett's voice carried across the clearing, sharp and clear. "Positive. I was careful. The escape was clean." Thorn was breathing hard, his prison clothes torn and dirty. "The guards didn't even notice until I was gone." "Good." Garrett's smile was cold. "Then we proceed as planned." "What about Riker? What about the girl?" "Riker is weak, distracted by a mate bond he threw away and now regrets. He's making emotional decisions instead of strategic ones. The council sees it. The nobles see it." Garrett began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. "As for the girl, she's a bigger problem than I anticipated." "She has power," Thorn said. "Real power. I saw it in the forest. Light that burns. Light that can kill. Which is exactly why she needs to be eliminated. Quickly, quietly." Garrett stopped pacing and turned to face his assembled men. "Half of you will attack the castle directly at dawn. Create chaos. Draw the guards' attention. Make it look like a raid for the royal heirs." The men nodded. "The other half will infiltrate through the servants' passages. Find Elara's chambers. She won't have guards posted yet. Riker's too busy playing king to think about basic security for his new Luna. We take her, kill her, make it look like Thorn's loyalists got revenge before he died." Garrett's smile widened. "The kingdom loses faith in Riker's ability to protect anything. The council calls for new leadership, and I step in to restore order." "And if she fights back?" one of the soldiers asked. "If the power is real?" "Then you overwhelm her with numbers. She's one girl, regardless of what parlor tricks she can perform. You're 30 trained soldiers." Garrett's voice hardened. "I don't care how much light she can make. Everyone dies if you cut them enough times." Elara's hands began to glow before she could stop them. Anger flooded through her, hot and fierce and barely contained. Riker's hand closed around her wrist, gentle but firm. "Wait," his eyes said. "Not yet." "What about Thorn?" another soldier asked. "What happens to him after this?" Garrett turned to look at Thorn, and something in his expression made Elara's stomach drop. "Thorn has served his purpose," Garrett said calmly. Thorn's eyes widened. "What?" Garrett drew a dagger so fast it was almost a blur. He drove it into Thorn's chest before the man could even raise his hands to defend himself. Thorn made a choking sound, blood bubbling at his lips. He looked down at the blade buried in his chest, then up at Garrett, confusion and betrayal warring in his eyes. "Nothing personal," Garrett said, twisting the blade. "But I can't have you claiming credit for this. It needs to be my victory, my triumph, my throne." Thorn fell. He hit the ground hard, blood spreading in a dark pool beneath him. His chest rose and fell once, twice, then went still. The clearing went silent. Garrett cleaned his blade on Thorn's shirt, methodical and unbothered. "Anyone else want to question my leadership?" No one moved, no one spoke. "Good. Then let's review the plan one more time. We attack at dawn, half on the castle, half on the girl. By tomorrow night, Riker is isolated, discredited, and desperate. By the end of the week, he's deposed. By the end of the month, I'm crowned king." Garrett sheathed his dagger. "Any questions?" "Yeah," Elara said, stepping into the clearing. "I have one." Every head turned. Garrett's eyes went wide. "How? Did I know you'd be here? Did I follow Thorn right to you? Did I hear every word of your stupid plan?" Elara smiled, and she knew it wasn't kind. Knew it probably looked half feral, especially with the light crackling around her hands and the 3 massive wolf pups flanking her. "Because I'm not the scared little girl you think I am. And you just made a very big mistake." Behind her, Ash emerged from the trees, her massive form radiating menace. Then Riker and his 20 soldiers spreading out to circle the clearing, cutting off every escape route. Garrett's face went from shocked to pale to red with rage in the span of 3 seconds. Lord Garrett, Riker said, his voice deadly calm. You're under arrest for conspiracy, treason, attempted regicide, and the murder of Commander Thorn. You can't prove. I just watched you stab him. 20 witnesses just watched you stab him. I'd say that's proof enough. Riker drew his sword, the metal singing as it left the scabbard. And everything else? The plan to attack the castle, to kill my Luna, to take the throne? We heard all of it. Every word. Garrett's hand moved to his own sword. His eyes darted around the clearing, calculating, looking for a way out. There wasn't one. Take them, Garrett snarled to his men. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the soldiers dropped his sword. I'm not dying for this. For you. Coward. Another soldier dropped his weapon, then another. Within seconds, half of Garrett's force had surrendered. The other half charged. Elara didn't hesitate. She threw her hands forward, and light exploded from her palms in a wave that lit up the entire clearing like daylight. It slammed into the charging soldiers and sent them tumbling backward, their weapons flying from their hands, their bodies hitting the ground hard. The pups lunged at the ones who tried to get back up. Storm caught one man by the leg and dragged him down, teeth locked around leather and flesh. Shadow moved like her namesake, appearing behind soldiers and knocking them off balance. Ember went straight for throats, not killing but definitely making them reconsider their life choices. Ash went for Garrett. The Lord tried to run, but the wolf was faster. She caught him by the leg, her massive jaws closing around his calf, and dragged him to the ground. Garrett screamed, high and panicked, and completely undignified. "Call her off!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Call her off! I yield!" Elara walked over slowly, the light still crackling around her hands. She let it build, let him see how much power she had, how easily she could end him. "Why should I?" she asked. "You were just planning to kill me, to sneak into my chambers while I slept and murder me in my bed. Seems only fair that Ash gets to return the favor." I wouldn't actually, it was just talk. Don't lie. It's insulting." Elara crouched down, meeting his eyes. "You wanted me dead because you thought I made Riker weak, because you thought a healer's daughter with a crown was easier to manipulate or eliminate than a king who actually knows what he's doing. You looked at me and saw nothing, saw weakness, saw an opportunity. You don't belong here. Maybe not, but I'm here anyway. And I'm not going anywhere." Elara stood. Ash let him go. The wolf released him, and Garrett scrambled backward, blood soaking through his pants, his face twisted in pain and fury. Riker's men moved in, binding Garrett and the soldiers who'd fought. The ones who'd surrendered were left alone, kneeling in the dirt with their hands behind their heads. It was over in minutes. Riker approached, sheathing his sword. His eyes swept over Elara, checking for injuries. "You all right?" "I'm fine, not even winded." Elara looked at the bound prisoners, at Thorn's body cooling in the dirt. "Is it really done? Is it actually over?" "The conspiracy is. Garrett's network is broken, but there will always be someone else, someone ambitious, someone who thinks they can do better." Riker's voice was tired but steady. "This is the life, the crown, the throne, the constant fighting to keep it." Sounds exhausting. "It is." Riker almost smiled. "But it's easier when you don't have to do it alone." Storm bounded over, covered in mud and clearly pleased with himself. He pushed his head against Riker's hand, demanding attention. "You did good," Riker told the pup, scratching behind his ears. "All of you did." Shadow and Ember trotted over, tails wagging. Even Ash looked satisfied, her golden eyes gleaming in the morning light that was just starting to filter through the trees. "We should get back," Elara said. "The council will want answers. The kingdom will want to know what happened. Let them wait." Riker looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression was softer than she'd ever seen. "You handled that well. Better than well. You were incredible." "I was angry." "That's different. You were controlled, strategic. You waited for the right moment. You let him confess everything before you acted." Riker shook his head. "That takes discipline, patience, strength. Or just a really good teacher." Elara managed to smile. "Seraphina's been giving me lessons." "Of course she has." Riker's mouth twitched. "Come on, let's go home." The trials took 2 weeks. Lord Garrett and 12 of his co-conspirators were found guilty of treason, conspiracy to commit regicide and murder. They were executed at dawn on a cold morning that felt appropriate for endings. Elara didn't watch. She'd seen enough death. The soldiers who'd surrendered were stripped of rank and reassigned to border patrol, far from the capital, far from power, but allowed to keep their lives. Riker believed in second chances for people who were smart enough to take them. The council was restructured, new members appointed, people who'd proven their loyalty, or at least their practicality. People who understood that the kingdom needed stability more than ambition. Elara attended every council session after that. She sat beside Riker, wearing her crown, and spoke when she had something to say. The first few times, the counselors looked shocked, then uncomfortable, then, gradually, accepting. She had ideas about the healing wards in the lower city, about training more healers, about using her power to help people instead of just defending against threats. The council listened. Not always happily, not always in agreement, but they listened. And the kingdom, slowly, reluctantly, in fits and starts, began to change. The pups became something of a phenomenon. People loved seeing Storm play in the gardens, his massive size and puppy enthusiasm a constant source of entertainment. Shadow and Ember patrolled the castle like they owned it, and the guards started leaving them treats. Ash was treated with the reverence she deserved, a royal wolf, ancient and wise, who'd chosen the new Luna as her alpha. Elara's power stopped being a terrifying secret and became a known fact. She used it carefully, deliberately, healing injured guards, helping with difficult births in the city. Once, stopping a fire in the lower district before it could spread and consume an entire block. People started calling her the Light Luna. Some meant it as praise. Some meant it as mockery. Elara didn't care either way. She knew what she was, knew what she could do, knew that she'd earned her place through blood and pain and refusal to break. That was enough. 3 months after the coronation, Elara stood in the overgrown garden on the eastern wall, the one Riker had shown her after Garrett's capture. It had become her favorite place. Quiet, wild, real. She was practicing with the light, seeing how long she could hold it, how many different shapes she could make. It was getting easier every day, more natural, like the power was finally settling into her bones, becoming part of who she was instead of something strange and foreign. Footsteps on stone announced Riker's arrival before she saw him. "You're thinking too loud," he said. Elara let the light fade and turned to face him. "I'm thinking the normal amount. For you, that's loud." He moved to stand beside her, looking out over the gardens. "What's on your mind?" "Everything. Nothing. Whether we're doing the right thing, whether this is sustainable, whether the kingdom will ever really accept me, or if they're just going through the motions." Elara sighed. "Take your pick. I ask myself the same questions every day." That's not comforting. It's honest. But I think if we're questioning ourselves, we're probably on the right track. It's the people who never doubt, like Garrett, like Thorn. Those are the ones you have to worry about. Riker's shoulder brushed hers. The ones who think they have all the answers are usually the most dangerous. Elara smiled despite herself. "When did you get wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. I was too busy being rejected and living in a cave." "Are you ever going to let me live that down?" "Not even a little bit." Riker laughed, a real laugh, the kind Elara was hearing more of lately, the kind that made him look younger, less burdened. "Fair enough. I deserve that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun move across the sky. In the distance, Elara could see the forest where she'd lived for weeks, surviving on stubbornness and desperation and the love of 3 wolf pups who shouldn't have survived. That forest had changed her. No, she'd changed herself. The forest had just been the place where she'd had no choice but to become something stronger. "Do you regret any of it?" Riker asked quietly. "The rejection, the pain, everything that happened." Elara thought about it honestly, about the night in the Great Hall, about the bond tearing apart, about the weeks of fear and hunger and wondering if she'd survive. "No," she said finally. "If none of that had happened, I'd still be the girl who thought she needed permission to be powerful. I'd still be waiting for someone else to tell me I mattered. I'd still be trying to fit into boxes that were never made for me. And now I know I matter. Not because of the crown or the title or even you." Elara looked at him directly. Because I survived what should have destroyed me. Because I saved lives when it would have been easier to save myself. Because I built something from nothing and refused to break even when breaking would have been simpler. Riker's eyes were soft in the afternoon light. You're terrifying, you know that? Good. Keep that in mind next time you think about doing something stupid. I'll try. A commotion from below made them both turn. Storm had somehow gotten into the kitchens again and was being chased by 3 cooks waving wooden spoons. The pup was covered in what looked like flour and was clearly having the time of his life. He's your heir, Elara said. You deal with him. Our heir, Riker corrected. You raised him. Ash chose you. He listens to you more than anyone. Our heir. The word settled into Elara's chest, warm and solid. Okay, she said softly. Our heir. Storm finally escaped the cooks and bounded toward the garden, flour trailing behind him like snow. He skidded to a stop at Elara's feet and looked up at her with complete adoration, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. You're a menace, Elara told him. Storm wagged harder. Riker laughed and reached down to ruffle the pup's flour-covered fur. Just like his Luna. I'm not a menace. You absolutely are. You just hide it better than he does. Elara wanted to argue, but she was smiling too hard. And she realized something in that moment, standing in an overgrown garden with a man who'd broken her and was slowly learning how to piece things back together, with a wolf pup who'd chosen her as his alpha, with a crown on her head that she'd earned through surviving the impossible. She was happy. Not perfectly happy. Not everything's fixed and nothing hurts anymore happy. But happy in the messy, complicated, still figuring it out way that real life allowed. She had wolves who loved her unconditionally, a partner who was learning to see her as an equal, a kingdom that was slowly, grudgingly, starting to accept that maybe fate knew what it was doing after all, and a power inside her that she was only beginning to understand, only beginning to master. The girl who'd been rejected in the Great Hall was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned the most important lesson of all. You don't need anyone's permission to be powerful. You don't need validation to be worthy. You don't need a bond or a crown or a title to matter. You just need the courage to stand up after the world knocks you down and say, I'm still here and I'm not leaving. Elara was still here, stronger, fiercer, more herself than she'd ever been, and she was never leaving. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Storm finally settled down, sprawling across both their feet. Shadow and Ember appeared from wherever they'd been exploring, curling up nearby. Ash watched over all of them with her knowing golden eyes. Come on, Elara said eventually. Let's go home. And for the first time in her life, home wasn't a place. It was a choice. The choice to keep fighting, keep growing, keep becoming. Elara made that choice every single day. She always would. Because she'd learned what it meant to be broken and rebuild yourself into something unbreakable. She'd learned that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up every single time. She'd learned that power came from within, not from titles or crowns or other people's approval. And she'd learned that sometimes the things that try to destroy you end up creating something stronger than anyone could have imagined. The rejected mate had become the light Luna. The girl they'd dismissed had become someone they'd never forget. And Elara Thorn, Healer's daughter, rejected mate, Luna of the Iron Throne, stood tall in the fading light and knew, without a doubt, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because fate had decreed it, but because she'd fought for it, and won.